Hello, everyone. Thank you, as ever, so much for coming to this documentation office hours. I was just saying before we started recording that we do have plans to try and we're coming up at Canonical. Typically, at this time of year, we do planning for the next 6 months and for the or for the year, in fact. And part of what us as technical authors do is we talk about what we'd like to do amongst ourselves and also for the academy. And so we're coming up with things that we'd like to improve, and one of them is the way that we run these office hours, coming up with a proper schedule, a published list of topics that you may be interested in, but also maybe switching to YouTube Live and maybe with some pre-recorded material. So anybody has any opinions on what they'd like these office hours to include, please let us know. Let us know on the Discourse forum or here or in any of the kind of, or the in Matrix, and in any of our kind of contact streams, and we'd love your feedback. For this documentation office hours, we thought it would be useful to look at some of the tasks that have been successfully completed, to perhaps give you an idea of what they've involved in terms of the interaction with us, and also the work that there's sometimes the work that's been done to make them to finish them. We've had about 15 or 16 tasks completed, which is really wonderful, and there's a range of things that people have done. So I thought it'd be worth looking at a couple of those, and also perhaps looking through a couple of the open tasks, to give people an idea of how we'd maybe tackle them, or to just present them to you as what they mean, because we all understand that it's sometimes very difficult with the 100 or 200 words perhaps that we provide as a description to understand the context of the tasks that we've created, and we want to try and make these as clear as possible. I'll share my little VM of Ubuntu running. Window, this one. Okay. So I've showed this before, but this is the Open Documentation Academy repository where we're doing all of our work, and the Issues tab here is where we're listing all of the tasks that we'd like that we're offering to kind of mentor on and hopefully get people excited about working on. So there's 25 open tasks at the moment. You can see this up here. It's a big ambition of ours to broaden this. I think I've said this before, and in terms of our planning, we really want to quadruple the number of tasks, but also open up the repository to other projects. And in fact, this week we've been in touch with other projects outside of Canonical to try and make those kind of tentative first steps, and then we'll do to try and see how that goes, and then we'll do an open invitation for anyone who may want to submit their own tasks and they want some documentation help on their own open source projects. So if you've not looked at this yet, we tend to precede the title of each task with the project that it involves. So the early ones were Snapcraft and Snap, the Academy itself, and then other projects at Canonical, XD and Landscape, and you can see them there. And then we've got this labeling system, which I think we've got a task to, if we haven't, we should have a task to try and improve the documentation around the labeling system, because we created it when we came up with the idea, but we've not really expanded upon it. There is a list, there is here on the README for the repository, there's a section called issue labels, and we provide only the briefest sentence on what those labels mean, but they're there to try and help you find an issue that you may want to work on. Discussion we've been having today actually is whether we should be still having the good first issue, because this is a bit of a standard at GitHub, where projects kind of advertise that they're willing to get contributions, and so we've done this to try and make the project visible outside of our own little bubble, but we're not sure if it's working or if it's still worthwhile, and we also need to decide whether we're going to do it on all of the tasks that we have or on none of them, because it does look confusing. In fact, all of these issues are good first issues. Some of them are obviously harder than others, and that's why we have this kind of size, which is it was about the help wanted. Oh, thanks, Robert. Sorry, it was help wanted. It's this one. It provides the same function. But the size should give an indication of how much kind of commitment it might take. But we just want people to try if they want to. So going at one of the closed issues, something that I closed recently was these early Snapcraft contributions, and you can see they've been closed, which means that somebody solved the problem, wrote the document, edited the document, and submitted their changes. A lot of the documentation at Canonical is published. I don't know if we've ever shown this before, but it's published via the open source forum software, Discourse. If I go to Snapcraft, so just this is the Snapcraft page. This is the documentation for snaps and Snapcraft. Snapcraft is the build tool for snaps. This is the kind of published, polished version of the documentation. So, for example, there's a quick start tool for using snaps, but all of these pages, in this case, are published from Discourse. And if you go to the very bottom of these pages, you'll see a link here that says, help improve this document in the forum. And if you click on that link, it takes you to the forum post, which is used as a source for that documentation. I'm not logged in, but if you're logged in and you've already done some interaction on the forum, anybody can actually edit these pages. They're like wikis, and all of our projects have a contributions guideline, and we kind of invite, outside of the Open Documentation Academy, we invite anybody to get involved. The Documentation Academy is basically an extension of this idea to try and keep it in one place. But with so much of our product documentation being published from Discourse, we do have this problem where, how do we manage the contribution? And so going back to the issue that I wanted to walk through, which was, let's use this one. The explanation in this specific issue says that this document lives here on the forum and it's published in the docs. And to be able to do a typical kind of open source contribution process, you normally have code and documentation in a GitHub repository. So rather than track all of the changes on Discourse and kind of flick between them and comment on the edits that have been made, what we did was, and this was that you can actually see this discussion can't see my fingers pointing at it, but we actually had this discussion as part of the discussion around assigning the task to this person who wanted to take it on, and we decided on moving the document from Discourse, which is actually all of these things are just Markdown. It's a little bit of a subset of Markdown, but it's mostly Markdown in terms of the page-let structure, which is very simple. It's very simple to understand. We moved the Markdown into the GitHub repository for the Docs Economy. And in fact, I put it into this specific directory here, Java applications.md. So just like code now, somebody could fork the repository, they could clone the repository to their local directory, and they could work on it in the editor here. As this is something we actually need to revisit. GitHub has an editor where you can make changes and suggest changes directly, and work much like most projects do, and like a lot of our other projects at Canonical do via read the docs. And so this is what we've done in this case. Not this one. The Java one at the bottom here. Sorry, it's the closed issues. And you can see that. Let's look. At some point, a pull request was created to commit the changes that have been proposed to the Markdown file inside the repository, and and that keeps everything in the same place then. And here's the pull request. And so if you click on this pull request, this is created by the person who wanted to do the work. It outlines the work that they've done, and you'll be able to see the files that they've changed, and also, as we've kind of discussed before, the differences between the original document here on the left and the updates that they've contributed. In fact, in this case, they've replaced an example, an old example, with a much more modern example that uses a lot more of the more recent build tooling for snaps, which was the task. And this was reviewed. That there was, if we go through it, there's a few comments. This is the normal kind of process. It's very, very rare that anything is submitted that doesn't require some kind of tweaking and typos and a little bit of fixing. Sometimes, especially with code, people will argue about implementation. So it's typical that a pull request may go on for a little bit of time with a bit of discussion about the best way to approach things and solve things. And you can see here in this section, the person that's making these submissions has responded to some of the review comments and has updated the example. And this is what this is showing. And you can see that the changes they've made in those individual parts, and you can see my comments on what they've been asked to do, or I've suggested, really. Until it's the final part is that here we've agreed that all the work's done, and it's right to go live, and we've merged it into the repository, and it's become part of the main branch, the default branch on the repository, and that work's finished. But in this case, because the documentation lives on Discourse, the contributor wanted to take the file that we had and then put it back themselves on Discourse, which I've slightly mentioned it, but you need to have you need to have spent a little bit of time reading forum posts and things on Discourse to be able to make those changes yourself. But we are very happy generally to just immediately grant those privileges to anybody who's taking on a task in the Documentation Academy as part of the issue, which is what we did in this case. This is all described in the contribute to our documentation pages on those docs. There's a section down here on new Discourse users and the kind of engagement they need to have been. Like, you need to have been into 5 topics and read 30 posts. It's a bit of I guess, to stop people wantonly going on and creating an account and changing things. And we haven't really had any problems with people doing that so far. So that's how it works. It has worked with Discourse. Similarly, we did this one at the very bottom here. This person, this was Alan Pope, I think, actually updated an example in a similar way, but made all their changes back to Discourse without working on a markdown file that we'd copied into the repository, and that's fine as well. I think if you want the actual GitHub experience and the experience of typical how open source projects typically work, it's much better for everyone if we just do it in the repository, and it's a much better learning experience. I don't know if anybody else, any of the other technical authors, wanted to share any of the. I'm putting them on the spot a little bit, but I didn't want to dominate the conversation. If anybody else wanted to share any of their the issues that they've seen through to completion, would you like to, Ruth? Or
sure,
yeah,
I can share some of the issues. Maybe I'll start with the simpler one.
I'll just give you host controls. I think.
Oh, okay.
Ruth, sorry, you think as a co-host? Right, I will stop presenting mine. Thanks, Ruth.
No problem. I think this is the window that I want to share. Yep, looks good. Okay, so I can share 2 different ones that I've been involved with. One was on LXD. And LXD is actually a bit different from what you were showing before. Namely, there we have the code and the docs in the GitHub repo. So it's more like the standard process. So we're not going through Discourse, which makes it both easier and harder, depending on what you think about. Easier because it's the standard process. You just do the changes in Discourse in a GitHub repo, of course. Harder because you have to deal with the rules that are set in this repository. So there's the common, every developer there that's used to following the process there, and there might be extra rules that you're not familiar with. It's usually documented in LXD. We have a contributors guide, so everything is written down, but it can differ quite a bit from one repo to another. And so if you're contributing to different repos, you might encounter different rules, different views, different people that are going to work with you. But overall, I think that's just how it is. And I've never really seen people being harsh about it. If somebody new comes in and contribute, you will usually get the help that you need, and people will be very accommodating there. This one was an issue where the request was to test the tutorial, which I think is a pretty good entry point for anybody, because it just means you don't need prior knowledge. You just want to look at what is the starting point for a new user, go through the steps and see if it works or if there's anything that needs to be fixed. And Peter decided to take this on and ran through the tutorial, found a few things that could be improved, and then opened a pull request directly in the LXD repo and had a few changes. And again, as Graham already showed, gave a bit of an explanation here of what the changes are. Then you can always go to files changed. Looks a little bit different for me because you can set it up in different ways. But there you can see what are the additions and changes. And then there was, again, as Graham showed, a bit of a discussion, a few improvements, a few questions around it, and then we decided to get it in. And yeah, there we had like a bit of an issue with the CLA that had to be signed, and the check didn't really work. So it took a little bit of time to get it in, but in the end we got it in, got a great improvement. And I see Peter is already working on the next pull request for LXD, so that is awesome. And yeah, was really helpful. Another issue that I can show, and that was actually quite a different one. Let me go back to the Open Docs Academy. There we have the issues, the closed issues. Was one on the starter pack. And I think in one of the previous calls, we talked a bit about the starter pack. That is pretty much a framework for setting up Sphinx documentation that should make it easy to get up Sphinx documentation in a way that looks consistent across different projects. So every project can use the starter pack to quickly set up their repository or their documentation repository and create documentation that looks consistent and has like all the things that we would like to see in documentation. One thing that was missing in there was that we would like to have a way of displaying contributors for each page, because this is the idea of open source, that people can contribute, but we also want to show that this is not the work of one person, but there's a lot of people who have contributed to this, and we want to acknowledge that. And we wanted some way of just being able to click on a link and see who has contributed to this specific page. So this is quite a different issue than the other issues that we have in the Open Doc Academy, because it's not actually about documentation. It's not writing anything. It's more a programming task to actually get this new functionality in. But I think that also reflects pretty well what we as technical writers or technical authors do, because we will always also have to deal a bit with a framework and not only the writing part. And so we have different kinds of tasks, and this one was a programming task related to the documentation framework. And Aspen took this one on and created a pull request for this. Let me see if I have the link here. Yes. And as you can see, there was like quite a bit of discussion in there. And this shows that this was like a typical programming task where you go in and first thing is to actually agree on what is it that you actually want to do? How do you best approach this? How does it work? Attempt to do it in one way, then find out that, oh, actually, this works fine for a small repo, but then for a bigger one, it doesn't scale. So we kind of had to go back and rethink it. But in the end, we got this in place. And if we just look at the changed files, there again, you see there's no documentation in here. We have CSS, we have JavaScript, we have HTML, we have a lot of Python. So most of the work is actually this Python function that gets the contributors and displays them. And if I look at the output, that's really the interesting part. We now have this in place, at least in the starter pack itself. So when you here look at this link, you see that there's 3 contributors to this one page, to the start page of the starter pack. You can click on it, see the people, can actually click on them to see what their contribution was to that one page. In this case, it was just like a very small change, but it could also be a bigger change. If we go to another page in the same documentation set, also go back to the bottom here, we see that there's actually 10 contributors to this page, and we can display them. And again, we can click on any of them and actually see what their contribution to that page was. So I think this is really a great contribution, and it was a lot of work. So thanks a lot to Usman for working on that. Yeah, and we have this in place now. So
yeah,
really happy about that. Yep, and this is what I had to share.
Thanks, Ruth. That was brilliant. I'll go back to sharing my screen a little bit so that we can just, I mean, I don't want to, is there anybody who wants to ask any questions about any of that? If not, I will go to, I will share my screen just to briefly go over have a look perhaps at some of the open issues, and I don't want to go on too long about this, but maybe we can talk a little bit about the issues that are open. I know that, I mean, Ruth just mentioned it. We want this task list to be really diverse, and it'd be nice if there were some more kind of programmery tasks, because some of what we do is programming. Not all of us are capable of it, and it doesn't matter. But some of us are really interested in it, and that's at different levels as well. I mean, sometimes we've developed an entire kind of tool chain, and other times you just really want to. I mean, Andrea and Robert talked about Veil a couple of weeks ago, and creating regular expressions for Veil, you know, is something else that is a different kind of magic. And we haven't really got so many of those, but we want to add them. There are quite a few tasks here that are, the Multipass improved language is a good example, which actually means just looking through the documentation and looking for words like simply and please, and suggesting alternatives for those. Like that's closely linked to our style guide, but also that's a very technical writer kind of idea, that when you say words like simply, it's not, you can't assume that it's simple for other people, because it may not be, and so you remove that kind of subjective element out of the text. And that's something that can nearly always be improved. I think even in the description here, Robert says that the Multipass docs are actually quite mature and in quite a good state. But these kind of things that they appear themselves almost by magic, these kind of issues, and that you can always go in and refine documentation in this way. And it's a really great place to start if you want to start making contributions to open source, any open source documentation project. You will always find things like that can be improved and really help people's experience when they're reading documentation for other projects. I know that there's a couple here that I created. There's creating another example of slightly different technical documentation is creating a table. There's one here for a comparison table between snap packages and deb packages, so that people can understand the differences and make an informed choice between which one they need. And that's not so much, I think people are often surprised in that we don't do too much writing. A lot of it ends up being research and speaking to people, and structuring things in a way that is the clearest possible way to present data. And this is very much at the end of this. Yeah, thanks, Jared. At the end of this, you're only going to have a table perhaps with 2 columns and a few rows, but it'll be really useful, and it's the best way of people understanding the difference between those 2 things. So this is really about inviting you to take a look at the tasks, and if you don't know where to start with one of those kind of reviewing tasks where you can just start reading documentation, because you get an idea of what the documentation is. With that, I think I will stop the recording, and if anybody does want to ask any questions, please do so. Stop. We're happy to answer questions about anything. If you're working on an issue, we can help, or if you want to know more about any of the issues in the repository, we don't mind answering. And equally, if you don't have any questions, that's fine as well. Or if there's anything else anybody else wanted to bring up, anything else, everyone else, makes sense. No, it's silent. Please don't use it. Okay. Would you mind? So our thoughts behind that were partly because we could have like a text-based QA. Could you say why you don't like it? So Iqbal is telling us to not use YouTube Live, but while it can be more convenient, too much Google. Well, yeah, we do have. I mean, there's nothing stopping us putting the recording up on another platform afterwards. I don't know of another platform that has the same kind of interface and the same kind of QA input that isn't equally proprietary. I'm being diplomatic. Maybe I put a Creative Commons license on the documentation office hours recordings, and then Iqbal, you can put them on whatever platform you want. These meetings, well, the recording part does go on YouTube. Yeah. I think it's all about convenience for a lot of people. I see. But I think you could watch it live without. You can't interact with it, but you can still watch it without an account. I'll look into it. But thanks for letting us know. Yes, Simon.
Yeah, just because you mentioned the Snapcraft table with app deb, you can put me in as the person who's going to tackle it, assign it to me. Just timing-wise, things have been a little busy right now. That's why I've been kind of quiet on GitHub, but I am interested in doing the work for that.
Okay, that would be fantastic. It really would. It's something I've wanted to add for a long time, actually, but yeah, just haven't got around to. Yeah, there was an interesting discussion there about the adding Flatpak and app image. Yeah,
a quick search found lots of tables doing those comparison of the 3 universal package approaches. So, you know, I see the value in it, but in terms of priority, I don't think it's it can be easily found elsewhere. But,
yeah.
But I also agree with, you know, you want to bring the answers to the place where the people are asking the questions. And so if they're on that site asking that question, yeah, you don't want to have to make them search elsewhere for it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I will do that. Is there any chance of mirroring with GitLab, maybe in the long term? Maybe. I mean, I think I'm open-minded about it. I mean, if it's about licensing and open source, I mean, there's still proprietary parts of the GitLab, not the self-hosted GitLab, but the GitLab that's hosted by GitLab. They do a wonderful job with their documentation, actually. And there's nothing, if you wanted to give it a try, you know, we could create a task to prototype posting the task list on GitLab, mirroring the task list to GitLab, if that was important to you. Yeah. I do use GitLab for some things. If there are no other questions, I don't want to take up any more of everybody's Friday afternoon time. So I'll say thank you again so much. Thanks for all of the engagement with the Academy. Thanks for turning up for this office hours. It's great to see so many of you each Friday. And I really enjoy it. And hope you all have a good weekend and hopefully see you next week. And thank you.